All right, so we're going to, as I said, we're going to kind of pick up from last week, and I got some material in case we don't get through too much stuff. Here, I'll put one right here.
I'm allergic to mics.
Okay, Larry, here you go.
He always likes to get
Jamie, I know you said you had something to say last week. Don't be worried. She's not here.
She said, don't talk forever. I'll try not to.
The mic is yours. So we kind of brought up last week the idea of storytelling. It was a little bit of our last discipleship class about being people who, the Bible is 50% narrative, okay? 50% storytelling, and it allows us to see ourselves in the story as certain characters. Oftentimes we see ourselves as the wrong character, but that's okay. Most times we go into reread some of these parables, those Pharisees, and you're really supposed to be, well, how do I relate to that, right? How do I see myself in that story? But ultimately it comes down to when we are training up the next generation, it's very good for them to know our story and not just all the good stuff, not all the good parts. One of the reasons why I believe the Bible is so authentic is because it doesn't leave out the bad stuff. It doesn't leave out the ick. It doesn't man, if you're really trying to convince me there's a God, don't put that in there, right? How many times have people used some things in the Old Testament to not believe in God because of things that if you were really trying to convince people, you would not have left that in Scripture. And yet, God gives us the raw, unedited version, and we have to then deal with that. So we had a lot of good stuff said last night. And I want to kind of open up the floor once again for those who were not able to say, I don't want to hear your conversion story necessarily. What I mean by that is when you decided to become a Christian, that can be if it's the same time when you really took Jesus seriously. And those can be two different events. Sometimes you come to Jesus because of, you heard a good lesson, you heard a good sermon, right? Or you were in the middle of a week-long gospel meeting, and they got you. But that next week, or a couple weeks later, you're back into your same routines. You're now a Christian, trying to figure out life. And then I think there comes a moment in every Christian's life where Jesus then becomes not real, but where you start taking it more seriously. Does that make sense, the difference between the two? Sometimes they're the same event, but some people have two events. Like Peter came to Jesus how many times? Peter had those events in his life where it had to become real. And then it wasn't until after the resurrection, really for Peter, where it became really real, where it pushed him to do things even when persecution came his way, even when temptation came his way, he was able to go through. So that's just kind of the stage. Jamie, I know you said last week, I looked over you, you put your hand up, and I was like, no, I don't want to hear that tonight. I didn't do that. But I want to give you an opportunity to tell your story.
Okay. Well, first of all, I guess my family, and no one in my family was a Christian. They were religious, sort of. I have 5 sisters and a brother, none who are Christians. They're religious, some are not. My mother was actually raised in a Christian church, but was not papal, needless to say. My dad was a Methodist. So first time I ever came in contact with the church as a Methodist was I went with an uncle of mine to a church in Salem, Illinois. He was going out with an elder's, at that time, daughter. And I'd never heard of the Church of Christ, to be honest. And the thing that, as a Methodist, I thought was kind of weird is didn't have any music. And I remember the guy who spoke, but I don't remember his message. So years passed then, and I met my wife. She worked on I was a teacher in a very small town, 500 people. And the bookkeeper at that school district plotted to have me go get something at the Western Auto where she worked. I guess they thought I was ready to get married, evidently. But anyway,
Please go get married.
So we kind of connected, a little slow at first, and I was still a Methodist. She was a Christian, and I just didn't get it for a long time. But she didn't give up. Thank goodness. I'm glad she never gave up because I was hard-headed and thought, well, I believe in the Bible. I believe in Jesus. We've all heard these things. But when we get right down to it, I was amazed how much I did not know. And so as we studied together, she studied, I studied, and she studied. And then I was baptized. I think I'd met her in the spring, and I think I was baptized late summer. But even at that time, so then I guess I could say I knew about Jesus, but I still kind of struggled with it. I think finally until we moved away from her parents, and we were on our own up in, even in another small town, and the closest church was 30 miles away. And so it was a drive, but we went, we went every time the doors open, we were there. And then a young couple who grew up in the church kind of helped us a lot, helped me and my wife a lot. I kind of struggled there for a while, and then finally I got it, and it just took me a while, I guess. That's about it, really. That's my story.
Yeah. So what would you say, if you can remember, was the moment? Was there like a moment, or at least you kind of like, you know what, I'm kind of doing this thing for real now. Like do you remember like what it took, or what was there certain things that you learned?
Yeah, I think, well, there's certainly a lot of things I learned that I was pretty ignorant of, but I think one thing that kind of clicked with me was congregation. We always went to a small congregation until my wife and I moved away from her parents, and she didn't say that, but anyway. So I went to this church 3 miles away. I thought it was huge. It had 200 people. It was basically military, right off of Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. So basically a military congregation. I was amazed how many people were there. But anyway, what kind of clicked for me is finally one day we were in a class, and they said, we need a teacher, and nobody wanted to teach. I said, well, I'll give it a shot. So that to me, it kind of clicked. I taught a class, I think it was on James, and yeah, in fact, I know it was. And I was surprised, really, that there were people there didn't know a whole lot more than I did. But I think for me that made a difference from then on. Then whenever we went, I taught a class or whatever. I haven't retired yet, but it gets a little older. As you get older, it's tougher. But anyway, and that's it, really.
It's amazing to me, the people who, when they actually get into teaching and they decide to teach, the things they start saying, they actually start learning. It's one thing to sit in the class and hear it. It's another to have to put stuff together and teach it. And, especially for me, especially teaching young kids, if you're going to have to teach them, one of the things you got to convince people of is not just the information, but that you actually believe in the information that you're putting off, right? And so, I feel like every time I walk away from teaching, I feel like I've taught myself, right? And I feel like I've reinvigorated myself. And got as much out of the class as hopefully, if not more, than those who are listening. Anyone else have anything when Jesus kind of became real for them? I know some of us spoke last week, but anyone have anything else they'd like to share? Don? Larry, you have one too?
Actually, I had about 3 of them.
Okay. Don, I'll get you after.
I got baptized in 65, and I didn't find a home church right away. Then when I moved to Collierville, I had a preacher there who took interest in me and got me to teaching classes. My wife was teaching classes, doing devos at home for the youth, things like that, and was doing real good. And then he was found to be cheating on his wife, and I was kind of preacher follower. And so we moved to Macon, Tennessee, didn't get involved there. Then we moved up here. I tried East Side, Maryville, Nelson Chapel. Then I settled on Greenback, and I got pretty well involved there. But my third one was when my wife passed away, and I realized, I need to get my act together because I want to be with her, not in the other place. So that's my 3.
Yeah. So involvement seems like a big, once you start getting involved and active, right? I think I posted something the other day, you can't get connected with a church you're not involved in, right? It's very hard to get connected when you're not involved in it. Don, go ahead.
My situation is a little strange in that I was raised a Presbyterian, and my junior year in high school, I became convinced that Christ was real and that I needed him. And I was talking to my grandfather, who was a Presbyterian preacher, and he said, "This is all well and good, but I have problems with predestination." And that set me to looking, and I looked a lot of places before I found the Church of Christ. I already knew Jesus, I just knew there was something missing in the way I was worshiping him.
Okay, so it was a strong conviction.
It was a strong conviction, but I knew something was wrong, so I had to look.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the seek and you shall find. Jesus says there's a lot of people who know, just like they know, but they just need to find the right Jesus and the right place, right, that they, kind of takes them in. Anyone else? Larry?
Mine is very similar to what all of y'all have already said. Mine took place when I was 20, my first year at David Lipscomb. I was asked to teach a class, 20 years old, and they asked me to teach the adults. And to stand up in front of that room and know that everybody in that room knew more than I did. It was a lesson in humility. I learned a lot about myself, that I didn't know how to study, that if I was going to do that, I was going to have to be a better listener, learn how to study, learn how to organize, just because somebody had enough faith in me to say, go teach a class.
Yeah. This is interesting. I was talking to, I think, Joe about this a couple weeks ago, because my dad, if you've known, in the last probably 6 years, they've moved 7 times in the last 6 years. And they've been to 7 different churches, just about. Five or, I'd have to count them, but they were in Alabama, 2 or 3 places, Johnson City, here, and then where they are in North Carolina. And everywhere they moved, they were not asked to teach a class. Like, my dad was never asked, he was told. He said, "Hey, we have an adult class coming up. It's in 3 quarters. Here's the material. We believe that you can teach this. Here you go." In every single church, they've just done that. They don't like, if someone refuses, they're not holding a gun to anybody's head. But my dad said what that did for many of the men there who would have never believed in themselves, who told, they were like, "Never will I teach. I will never do that." They were kind of prodded into it and really told to do it. And they did it, and it got easier and easier and easier every time they did it. Now, obviously, not everybody can or want to, but I think a part of the church's responsibility is to see something in people that they don't see in themselves. And I think that's what Jesus spent a lot of his time doing. And that's what the Bible spends a lot of time doing, seeing something in people that they don't see in themselves. And a lot of times it takes more work for people to get more involved than others. Some people are just, "Hey, anywhere," right? You ever have those people? "Anywhere you need me." And some people are like, But all of them have the same kind of uses. But I like that. I think the involvement aspect and, really encouraging yourself to know more and do more, that's really what Scripture is about. Here, let me get me another mic here. You got it? Jennifer.
So I think I told you this last week, that I really appreciated you asking us this question, and it really made me think about when it happened for me, but also, am I a good student of Jesus? Do I have a relationship? I started thinking about it, if you walked into the room, you know how you have acquaintances, and then you have friends, and then you have people you've seen? How would he look at me? Would it be like he'd beeline, "Oh, there's my good friend"? What was my relationship? So this morning, I was flipping through Facebook or Instagram or something like that, and this video popped up, And it caught my attention because it was Alice Cooper, who back in the day when Tom and I were in high school, it's like, well, Alice Cooper seemed kind of rough around the edges, like this. Anyway, it was a conversation with him, asking him his opinion on Christ. And he is a Christian, and what he said just hit me. I mean, he said, we don't teach Jesus enough. We don't teach it enough. And he said, think about that verse in the Bible where it says, nobody goes to the Father except through me.
Yeah.
And that just hit me this morning about, man, if we are taking a trip and we're pulling up a map, I would say an atlas or GPS, and we see all these roads are closed, we're going to look for the road that's open, right? And it's like, do we understand the importance of that relationship if that's the way we have to go to get to God?
Yeah.
It was just, I don't know, it's just something that I was like an aha moment. I'm like, ooh, I think I got to get back to work again.
Yeah, and the reason why you do these exercises, and I'm not the best at them because, I would like to teach and give information and do all that stuff. So this is me. Me listening sometimes can be hard, right? Sitting up here listening and facilitating these things. But a part of the reason why you do these exercises is to, even in your own marriage or your own friendships, your own relationships, you got to ask, am I a good friend? When, or if I have a good friend, when did our friendship take on a new level besides, hey, we're kind of cool with each other, we like to hang out, to this is my friend, right? And what level of trust, what level of intimacy, sometimes it's what did you go through together, right? A lot of your closest relationships are people who were there for you when you went through something, or you were there for them, or you have a common thing that you went through. And I think it's the same with Christianity. I mean, a lot of times it's an event that makes you look at something differently, or it's several events, or it's a lifelong of events, right? And and as I was thinking about, I would probably, last week I wish I would have maybe asked the question a little bit differently, but as I was thinking about it, I think about all the times that Jesus has become more real for me, right? Not just, there wasn't a moment where it was on 100%, never had any lulls, never had any low moments, never had any valleys, right? But what I was really looking for, what was the moment that sparked you so that when those valleys came, there was a hill, right, to come around, right? What was the thing that kind of sparked that interest in God, interest in Jesus? But I'm going to be honest with you. The thing that keeps me in God and in Christ, kind of sort of what Larry said, but in a different way, it's the humbling aspect of whenever you're off on your own, or whenever you try to do it on your own, or whenever you think you're good. The moment you think that, just look out around the bend. It's a funny preacher joke, and I know this kind of relates, but whenever you have a really good sermon, there's very few sermons where I walk down and I go, that was a good sermon. I always am very critical of my sermons. In the Sundays where I'm like, man, I just could have done better, I feel like I get progressively better when I'm doing that, but the Sunday that I stand up there and go, I now know how to do this thing. I'm the best thing since sliced bread. I can preach. The next week is usually a flop for me. The very next week is usually a flop. And I think it's keeping that humble attitude that the thing that got me into Jesus is the thing that needs to keep me in Jesus. It's one thing to get you into Jesus. You have a really rough moment, a really bad moment, a low moment, and Jesus is the only way out. But what happens when you have several ways out now, right? Because you're out of that hole or that dark place that you're at, and now you have several options. You have free time. You're good with your mental state. You're good in your emotions. You're not feeling, depressed and anxious and all those things. Reminding yourself what Jesus did to bring you out. And whenever we lose that thing, guess where we end up back? We end up back in that spot, and it's kind of like the book of Judges we've been studying, right, on Sunday night. We kind of get good, and we go back down. So I think telling ourselves and reminding ourselves, why are we in this thing? Why are we following Jesus? What are we here for? Helps us, right? Any other stories or things people want to say before we get on? Okay, turn your Bibles to Acts 22. I want to do a little bit of we're going to talk about Paul and him retelling his conversion story. So there are 3 different times, at least in the book of Acts, we have recorded that it is recounted of Paul's conversion story. Okay? In Acts 22, I just think there's a lot of ways it's worded that helps us understand what is the purpose of storytelling. Because have you ever met the person who lived a really bad life, a really rough life, but they tell you about it just because they almost have a little bit of a pride in how bad they were or how rough things may have been, and the reason they're telling you almost seems like they're bragging on their past rather than, trying to have you learn a lesson from their past. It's more of a badge of honor for them to wear around. And, if there's someone who has a pretty rough past, it's Paul. At least when it's in his connection with religion and Jesus, right? When he says, I was the chief of all sinners, he wasn't wearing that as a badge. He was wearing that as I'm glad God chose me. That was what he's basically saying. I'm glad God chose me to be an example to you. Because if he can save me, then he definitely can save you. Right? That was his purpose. And even uttering those words was the fact that he wants people to know his story, one, so they realize there's hope for them too. And I think that's the big thing about us talking to our youth, our kids, in Bible classes, telling them stories in ways they can remember. But I want to start in verse 37 of actually Acts 21, because it leads us into what's going on. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, May I say some things to you? And he said, Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian then, who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness? Paul replied, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people. And we had given him permission. Paul steps, motioned with his hands to the people. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language saying, Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you. And when they heard he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they became even more quiet. And he said, I am a Jew. So the first thing that he does is he wants to immediately connect with his audience. Now, Greek was the common language, wasn't it? Everybody would have spoken Koine Greek. So he specifically switches to Hebrew. Why? To get their attention. He's connecting with them. He's speaking to a crowd of Jews who know both Greek and Hebrew, and he purposely switches to Hebrew, not to show off. Hey, look, I know 2 languages. But instantly there is it's like if you ever been to a foreign country and everybody speak in the foreign country, then you hear somebody speak English. It's never happened to me, but I can imagine what it'd feel like. Right? There'd be almost like, oh, hey, let's talk. I haven't talked to anybody who actually speaks English. Right? There's got to be some kind of connection. And so in storytelling, first of all, there's got to be a reason. Why are you telling this story? Who are you connecting to? Why are you connecting to this audience? What is the purpose? And especially for young people, if you've ever been a parent and you've tried telling your kids things, or you tried telling them a story, what do they want to know? Dad, why are we listening to you? Dad, why are you telling this story? There were times I would purposely ask my dad to not drive certain places because I didn't want to hear the same, I killed a deer here, and this is what I was doing in the deer stand, and this is how long it took when we had to, trace the deer and track the deer after I shot it. I just didn't want to hear the story again, because it wasn't a dad sharing personal stories with his kids. It was my dad having to reminisce, and every time he drove by that spot, he just had to tell that story. And so, but if there was a reason he was telling the story, if there was a purpose to it, if he was trying to connect with me in some way, that's what I care about. And so Paul is connecting. And I think one of the reasons why there's a generational gap, okay, and that's kind of what we're talking about, is maybe the younger generation doesn't understand, why are you telling me this? Why are you wanting to talk to me, right? It was a really weird feeling the first time I went and talked to young people, and they kind of looked at me as an older person. You ever had that experience? Where like before they saw you as one of them, and then there's one day where you're just not one of them anymore. And it gets real awkward real quick, and it's like, I don't know what to say to you people, right? We don't have anything in common. And so whenever I go and speak to the teens or speak to the young, I have to have a reason and let them know immediately, why am I here? Why am I talking to you? Okay, why am I trying to connect with you? So there's got to be something that connects me and them. And for Paul, it was, I think, speaking in Hebrew. Immediately they all did what? It says they all got quiet and they listened. So the first thing you need to do when you're talking to people, why are you talking to me? What's the reason? What's the purpose? Let's keep going. He says, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, as all of you are this day. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women. I find that interesting, because what is Paul on trial for? Why is he even in front of these people? He's about to go to jail. For what? Yeah, well, but it's basically being a Christian, right? Being a Christian. And so he's speaking to the very people who are putting him on trial, saying, I was you. I was there. I led the charge, right? I am you. And a lot of times, that's the way we make a common ground with the person that we're talking to. Ryan, go ahead.
But he was the best of them.
Yeah.
He was the top of them.
So there is a fine line between you're setting yourself up as authority to speak on this. I'm an authority figure to be able to speak on this. I have some credibility, and there's also some authenticity in this.
Well, and I think that's why also he started out in Greek or in Hebrew, is because he was basically validating that, yes, I am a Jew.
Yeah.
I am one of you.
And to be honest, because he was a well-educated Jew, his Hebrew was probably what? Really well polished. And so when they're listening to him, they're immediately going, this is an educated man, right? At least. And the fact that he's an educated Hebrew means he learned Hebrew somewhere. Well, where did he learn? He learned from Gamaliel, right? So he's setting himself up. He's authentic. I am one of you. I'm not a fake pretending to be, right? I am one of you. I probably am the best of one of you. I mean, he doesn't say that, but I mean,
that's kind of what he's saying.
That's kind of what he's saying. But I understand the feelings you have towards me. I once had them towards people like me. And, I think one of our hardest jobs as the next generation, older generation, trying to relate with these younger generations is trying to get them to understand that I was there. But that only works if you're not looking down on them. And every time you talk to them, it's not criticism. And every time you talk to them, it's not because they're in trouble or they're making mistakes. You have to build credibility. Now, Paul hasn't been in front of this audience, so he's trying to build credibility through a different type of way, but we build credibility when people that we see every day through everyday interactions. And then when we speak to them, they listen. But Paul's got to set himself up real quick. I'm an authority figure. I've got the credentials. I'm one of you, but there is something that changed in my life. What changed? And that's really the stories we've been telling the last 2 weeks, is what changed in Paul's life to make him one of the Jews like everybody else and make his life turn around. Okay, and that's what he's about to say. He says, as the high priest, this is verse 5, and the whole council of elders can bear witness, from them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus to take those also who were there and bring them in the bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. As I was on my way and drew near to Damascus about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me. Everything that you guys were just doing the last 2 weeks is what Paul just did in that verse. I was heading in this way in my life. I was doing this, and then Jesus. Jesus interrupted my life. And really, that's the way we need to see it. If anybody nicely and casually comes to Jesus, I would question that. I would say you have to confront people with Jesus. People have to confront Jesus. Because nobody's just living a path where they're just good, right? And they don't need anything, and they've already got everything established themselves, right? Where Jesus is going, wow, Jesse, all you got to do is confess me. Nothing else you got to change in your life. There's nothing else you got to do. You're already doing everything you need to do. You're just missing, proclaiming my name, or you're just missing baptism, or you're just missing, this one missing link. There's a transformation. People need to confront Jesus. And I think that's what we're scared about oftentimes, isn't it? When we're studying with people, that's interesting. When we're studying with people, if we can get them to confront Jesus and not us, take us out of the picture. You're not fighting me. You're not fighting me. You're having to confront with Scripture. You're having to confront with the real Jesus. Because I think there are a lot of people who know Jesus, or at least think they know Jesus, but their Jesus and the biblical Jesus may be vastly different. Okay? So we're getting people to be confronted with, and that's what Paul says. Now, he had a heavenly experience of being confronted with Jesus, but I think just being confronted with the Scriptures is a confrontation with Jesus. What do I need to die to? What do I need to give up for me to be a follower of? Does someone have their hand up? Make sure. All right. No one? Okay, so watch. He goes, and I fell onto the ground and heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, rise, go into Damascus, and there you'll be told all that is appointed for you to do. And since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me and came into Damascus. And then we have Ananias, a devout man according to the law, well spoken of all by the Jews who lived there, came to me and standing by me said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. Now I want to bring in there for a moment. Paul happened to have a direct encounter with Jesus, so he kind of skipped a step. But did Paul learn all of this and come to all this on his own? Does Jesus not put people in our lives to help direct us and guide us? And I think in our storytelling, one of the things we're connecting with people with is maybe I'm here telling you this story so that it can help you in your journey with Christ. I'm not here to brag. I'm not here for you to just listen to what I have to say. I'm wanting to help you in your walk with Jesus, especially when I'm talking to my kids, right? You're talking to especially young kids. I'm here to try to help you. And maybe there's something in my story that you can hear and you can connect with that will help. Now, why I think people need multiple different people in their lives is because my story may not connect with you. But but yours might. Yours might. Right? So we need to be connecting with people. Yes?
I don't think it always has to be like this big dramatic. It's not always a big dramatic realization for some people. Like in my case, it was, I kind of grew up in a family lifestyle that I just thought, like, we're good. Like, we're good people. I go to church. We believe in God. We believe in Jesus. I went to VBSs. I went to confirmation classes. I sang in choirs, and I had good friends, and I didn't drink, and I didn't smoke, and I didn't do drugs. And it wasn't until I heard Rick talking about, like, he spent a lot of time on apologetics and just the importance of baptism. And, like, that was it. Like, I was like, how did I not know this? Like, that was just left out.
Yeah.
And all of the other things that I learned or knew, it was like, how was that such a missing part of it? And I think I really have always enjoyed sciences. I've always been good at science, and like hearing somebody that had that much knowledge and like wealth of knowledge and was an extremely intelligent person, also bringing together like scripture, it really helped me in a way that I don't think maybe other people could have like brought that to my attention.
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes there's a specialization, right? And there are certain topics. I mean, I won't mention names, but there have been certain topics that I've done here that like all of a sudden people who were not really curious about the Bible or not really curious about those types of things, that topic was like, I need to hear more about that. And they were there at almost every single time that I taught that topic. Well, guess what? We're going to have to move away from that topic eventually. But that one topic or that one specialization brought someone in to hear, and they stayed, right? And there are different aspects of Jesus that bring people together, right? Some people came to God because of fear. Hopefully, they didn't stay for fear, right? But it was the fear aspect. Some people came to God because they just heard the stories about Jesus and they really connected with his love and compassion for the poor and his justice, right? Those types of things, and that's what they want to be a part of. And so that's why we need multiple. I don't think there's one story. I think that's what you're getting at. I don't think there's one. I have several stories I could tell of different points in my life of where I needed somebody or needed something to help me. And when this story is being retold, look at the three different ways it's being told. Read Acts 9, Acts 22, and Acts 26. And look at the nuances. Paul doesn't tell the story the same way to the same audience. There's a certain audience, I'm going to speak in Hebrew to this audience. He didn't do that in other audiences. He didn't do that in Acts 26 when he speaks this, when he tells this story. He speaks in Greek. Why? Because it wouldn't have worked there. Right? So even telling the same story different ways with different emphasis is really helpful. So was that the second bell? Second bell? Really what I wanted you guys to encourage you guys to do is to, one, what Jennifer brought up, to think about what are the things that are important to me? Why did I come to Jesus? And remind yourself of those things and being reinvigorated in your faith now, right, to help you to encourage, but also pass that stuff on. Pass your story on to others. And I think that's the best evangelism tool we have, is this is what God has done for me. In these moments in my life, he can also do it for you. Okay? All right, thank you.